Welcome to the Mycelium Network Podcast, a podcast for early stage web developers and the mentors, teachers, and communities that help them along the way. Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for joining me for today's podcast. How are you doing?
Oh my goodness, I am doing fantastic. We've got a bright, sunshiny day out here on the west coast of Canada just before we move into our rainy season. So I'm having a good day, and I'm getting to talk to you too, which is a pretty fantastic way to start my weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the weather over here is also pretty decent. It's hot, and it's too soon to be this hot, but I think the weekend is looking pretty decent. So yeah, that's good. So I found you on Polywork. I'm really appreciative to Polywork because I had this idea. I thought I'd just put it out there and see if people were interested, and I was overwhelmed by the response. So much so that I've been like finding it hard to keep up with getting back to people and saying like, oh my goodness, yeah, let's do this. So you were one of the first folks that reached out actually, and I read a little bit about your background, and I thought this is perfect for the show. So I'm not going to speak about who you are because you know you are better than me. So I'm going to listen, and I'm going to let you take as much time as you need, go as far back as you want to, and tell us your story.
Oh, I don't know about that. You might have gotten more about me from the backgrounds that I sent in than I'm even going to remember today. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with kind of where I am now and maybe go a little bit further backwards. So I'm an educator based here in British Columbia, Canada. So just on the west coast of Canada, with a big focus around technology education and educational technology. So I've worked in the middle school, high school, post-secondary levels, and sort of throughout the entire time that I've been in the world of education and the world of sort of training other people to do it. I've spent sort of my entire career also just exploring technology. I mean, I remember my first job post-graduation from a non-tech related degree was to build a website for an organization that I was working for, and it was kind of my first taste of what this looked like professionally. Yeah. So technology enthusiast, really passionate about exploring ways to get people excited about technology and to look at alternative ways of teaching people technology. And then I also work in the industry as a community manager for a really amazing company here in Canada called Battlesnake, and I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about them a little bit later.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want you to talk about that. I saw that and I was like, what is this? This sounds really interesting. So it's kind of cool because so you're a teacher that also teaches teachers, which is like Inception. It's really cool. So as you know, the whole idea behind this podcast and the community that I've started is all about helping early stage developers get into this industry in a welcoming, friendly way and help them identify by talking to them, but also by talking to teachers and mentors, find where is the missing pieces. What are things that's not working so that we can find ways of improving this so that the pain, the struggles that we might have gone through when we started, we don't have to repeat that for the next wave of folks getting into the industry. And I think one of the things that's also very important to me is to invite and include everybody, irrespective of where you are in your career development and irrespective of where you live and irrespective of your gender, your background, your choice of how you identify yourself. Like, I want this to be a welcoming place for everybody where they can feel they can talk openly and freely about what works and what doesn't, celebrate their wins and celebrate the failures. So that is a lot. With all of that said, as a teacher who teaches teachers, but also teaches students, what advice do you have for both those parties, I guess? Anything that in your time spent doing this, anything that you have found that's like maybe not worked so well and that you found like, oh, these are better ways of addressing. So either speak to students or specifically to the industry. in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. So, I gotta say, first off, I absolutely love that mission, this idea of inclusiveness and accessibility to this world. Even though technology industry is everywhere and almost every company is a technology company now, particularly on the developer side. I mean, around certainly in North America, but I think around the world, it is still historically a very dominated by a very specific population. And so any initiatives that can be done that will enable people that are not coming from that dominant culture to enter this space, I think is incredibly important. So huge kudos for the Mycelium Network podcast and the work that you're doing in this space.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, and then in answer to your question, so it's interesting. So this was exactly what you're talking about, and the exact reason behind Mycelium Network was actually one of the big pieces behind one of the initiatives that I'm most proud of that I helped to develop in sort of this technology education space, which was a program called High Tech U. So it's a program based out of the University of Victoria, which is a fairly large research intensive university here in Victoria, British Columbia. Has a really spectacular software engineering and computer science program, but much like the rest of the world, not necessarily turning out the number of folks that need to be produced out of post-secondary institutions to prepare them for industry, and in many ways turning out the same type of people that are dominating the industry right now, which is not necessarily that sort of perpetuation cycle that we're looking to do. So with this initiative, it was very specifically focused on the exact thing that Mycelium is sort of really focused on, which is how can we create a safe, accessible environment that will enable folks that didn't necessarily see themselves in technology to find their place in the industry, be it as somebody working in customer support or somebody that's working on back end, but helping them find a place. And I can go into detail about kind of what that program looked like, but I think the biggest thing that came out of that initiative, and I ran it for 3 years and built it up with a great team, was kind of counterintuitive to get people excited about tech. It's less about the tech itself and more about the problems that technology can solve, and really just enabling people to gain an understanding of how they can use these free, amazing resources that are out there to solve a problem for them, and switching this world of you need to be the sort of glasses in your basement with the hoodie, eating nacho chips and drinking soda, which we all love to do, but that's kind of that archetypical computer scientist look, right? And so, we really focused there on switching to the problem solving and then getting people excited about tech and then sort of showing them the different gateways that are there.
That sounds great. I'm totally for the problem solving thing, because I think one of the challenges that I've heard over and over and over again, and I experienced it myself, if you are transitioning from one, because I used to be a musician, and then I found it hard to make a living. I got married and we had a kid, and so it was hard. I couldn't financially sustain us. I mean, thankfully I had parents that could help us, but as a 21, 22-year-old, you don't want your daddy to look after you. You want to be independent, right? You're like, so I had to find some way of making money, and at that time Flash was still a big thing, and that was my gateway drug into this, because it allowed me to combine different things, right? It allowed me, because I was like, oh, I can do animation with this thing, that's cool, and I can use music, because back in the day, like in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001, it was pretty popular to have this little fancy intro with animation and music and stuff, and then you add a button right there to enter the website. So I ended up building quite a few of those intros for clients. So that allowed me to give creative expression to myself and still have this little connection to my musical career, but also start getting into the tech thing. And so, but with that said, it was still hard because even when I was freelancing, how do you get a client if you have no work to show, right? So now you have to like try and create these like pseudo projects that don't really exist. It's not for anybody. You have to somehow um, uh, get yourself inspired to do this thing, just to say that, oh, here's the thing I built. It's not really for anybody, but you can kind of see my skills, right? And but it's me by myself alone, and GitHub and these things didn't even exist back then. So, it was like literally me putting it on a URL and pointing it to it. So it was hard. It was really tough. And then again, I realized that maybe freelancing isn't going to work. I struggled to build my business to a point where I felt like we as a family will be financially stable, and so I decided to join the workforce, and that was tough because I've been doing it for like 2-3 years at that point, but I had very little experience to show for that, because a lot of the things I did was literally make things for myself as a means of having like designing logos for fictitious companies and stuff like that. And so that's one of the things that I want to do as part of the Mycelium network, is to anything that we do, like for example, the Mycelium network needs a website, right? So I want to do that with the community. I don't want to go and build it. I want to do it with the community, and I want to do it like a for real project. We have a project board on GitHub. We have tasks. People get assigned to tasks. People need to do pull request reviews. People need to review each other's code, all that kind of stuff. Like, and be involved in how do we like take that thing and get it live on the internet. Because the awesome thing about GitHub is it's open, and so you can point any potential employer to the work you've done. And the nice thing, if you do it in this like, so it's great to contribute to open source in general. I think it's a good way to get experience and that kind of thing. But if you're involved in something that's run as a structured project, you also show the employer that you can work as part of a team. You can take criticism, deal with it, not give up, maybe push back even if you feel strongly about it, and come to a consensus and land your work. I think that is a really good way. So I think the thing that you mentioned about High Tech U and how you looked at specifically problem solving, I think that's key. And I think it's a key thing that's missing. So I'm curious, what do you think about all of that? And how did you address this whole thing of creating problems for people to solve, to have a means of signaling to employers what they're capable of?
Absolutely. And you're totally right. I mean, there's so many courses that you can do out there. And if you look on, it's interesting, if you go on to GitHub and you look for projects, a lot of the time, right, you'll find these half-finished repos of like a project that somebody had to do as part of this course, and there's no documentation. It's obviously something they did, and it's almost discouraging. But there is such power in that world of GitHub and open source, and I'm super excited to chat like open source and how that plays in. But for us, one of the big pieces, and it ties into the creativity piece as well, is we spent, so the kind of core program that we ran was like a 5-day long, I call it kind of an extended hackathon for beginners. So instead of sort of coming in and giving a problem statement or giving like a theme, we would sort of have them come in and we would teach them the fundamentals that they needed to know, and then just kind of put them out there in the world. And we brought in mentors from local technology companies who would basically just be there floating around. So whereas unlike that traditional hackathon that you go to where you might have that, but it's generally about tapping into the expertise that's in your team or in your friend group, this was the expectation that nobody was coming in with any knowledge. And then the mentors were just kind of there and able to support when questions came up. But within the world of the problem solving and ensuring that this was something that's going to be valuable for the students, one of the big pieces of that onboarding process was actually having them gain an understanding of design thinking from like the very base level of going and finding a problem that is relevant to a user base. And the unique thing in that program was we had about 16 high school age students that were there from grade 9 to 12. And we said, great, within this sort of like this captured user group, go talk to each other and see what problems you can find within this group of 16 youth. So you've got your target market is there. You're building something that solves a problem for young people. You're going to do the user research all within like this super fast, like hour-long period. And then we're going to work with you to identify the thing that you can actually accomplish with your skill level in this sort of like 3 days fundamentally of programming. And so that was a really powerful thing within this model of the projects that they were creating. Is every project that they were creating, they could speak to like why this is an issue because they're the user for it. And even if they're not the perfect user, the super user, the early adopter, they're gonna get it because they're in that headspace.
That's super clever. I haven't thought about that angle. That's really nice. Like essentially telling your community, hey, instead of me bringing a project to you, you bring a project to me by talking to each other. That's really clever. I really like that. That's a nice one. And okay, cool. So you've kind of like opened the door to open source and you said that you'd be really keen to talk about it. And it was one of my questions. So let's dive into it right now. How do you see open source? What role does it play in teaching and learning? So from both sides. I know it's a big
Oh my
topic.
goodness. Yeah. I love big topic though. This is good. We can go so many directions. So I mean, in terms of I mean, I can talk about my experience using it within sort of teaching environments and then also just personally because I'm sort of learning this web development experience. So from the teaching perspective, one of the really great things that I've found is the open source world has really invited new developers to get a deeper understanding of the technology that's out there and that they're using every day. Whereas in the past, again, very similar to this project idea, if you wanted to see what code looked like for a project, you would have to go and find somebody that had published on their personal website or on some other service, some fairly boring project that was maybe in a language that you weren't interested in, to now the world where literally you're excited about live streaming and you want to see like the code behind Twitch. Now, not all of it is going to be exposed, but you can go and take a look and sort of see like, hey, this is the stuff that's underlying this technology. So I think there's a level of playing to people's interests and allowing them to get exposed to programming through exploring areas and topics that they're passionate about. I mean, I teach at a middle school level, so I deal with learners that are doing things on sort of Minecraft and Minetest a lot. That's a big thing with the age group that I work with, and the mod community in there is huge. And the cool thing is I have kids learning about open source without ever knowing the word open source. They go and search Minecraft mod that does this thing. They end up on GitHub. They pull the code down. They're reviewing it. And just based on their interest level, they're going in and they're discovering sort of open source. And that's opening the door to saying like, this isn't this ethereal thing that I can't understand or I'll never be able to wrap my mind around. They're actually letting me in the door. So I think accessibility is huge there. I think for me, personally, as a learner who's been going through the development process, what I love is I've always been the kind of person that if I did a course like where I'm building something, I'm going to get to step 3 of 7 and I'm going to be out. I'm going to be done. I'm like, this isn't something that I'm really interested in. What I love doing and what I found really powerful about open source is actually being able to just go and grab somebody's code and then mess around with it. Like have a working piece of code and then to go in there and I'm going to change a variable or like alter a method and I'm going to see the issue and the change that does in there. And that's like been a super powerful part of my learning journey is having this massive resource to go and dig into code like that.
Yeah, for sure. I was just about to ask you, like, I wonder how effective it is to, for example, present and well, this is not somebody that's beginning, but somebody that's like had a little bit of learning of HTML, CSS, and a bit of JavaScript to create like a super simple project, right? It's like, say, for example, a mobile navigation, right? So it has a little hamburger menu. When you click it, it opens a thing. When you click it again, it closes it. And so it does a couple of things. You know, it reacts to the user. It changes the icon based on the state of the menu. And then to tell students, okay, here's the code that makes that happen. Can you look at it, read through the code, and write a blog post explaining how it works? I've often thought if that would be an interesting approach for learners.
100%, and at every level. So for the High Tech U program, when we built out the academy, that's exactly kind of what we did. Not the blog post angle, but we would actually give them a template that was a functional template, but it was the most basic template, right? It would so in our first iteration, they were doing really simple web apps built on, I think, Node or something like that, and it would basically spit out a thing that said "Hello World." The most recent iteration, we did the same thing with a GitHub template, but it was a Discord bot, and you would sort of follow the steps and it would give it. But again, it was not the build part 1, 2, 3, and eventually you'll get to a bot. From day one, you had a functional thing and your role was to customize it, which was huge. And that kind of carries through even to the work that I do with Battlesnake. And so within that, that it's a very open source company, very community focused, but because of the nature of what it is, the game itself requires you to build your own web server in a different language. And so we provide templates that are really dumb snakes that are competing in this game, that will not die. They will do a thing, but it's not going to be super powerful. And what's interesting there as well, that's I think even more unique about what we're doing with that company, is that let's say somebody is using a template and say Python, and they've learned how the Python template works, and we've got a Go template or a Rust template. They can then go and say like, okay, I see how it was laid out in Python. I'm going to go over to Rust and see how it's laid out there. And you're going to gain this really practical understanding just by looking at those different templates that are accomplishing the same thing. And yeah, I think that the whole world, when GitHub did templates, they shifted the game in such a huge way for education.
That is for sure. I've totally embraced that. I've got this project called Project Calavera, and it's very intentionally titled that way because it's all about creating skeletons, and some of them are the main one, the Project Calavera is a CLI that basically, if you're starting a new project, and so you want to add prettier, you want to add some ESLint rules, you want to add stylint rules, maybe you're using Sass, so you want to add some Sass stuff. That's kind of cumbersome, right? You either have to create a template that you then every time fork, or not fork, when you create a new repo, you create it from that template. Or you need to like copy and paste stuff from this like GitHub repository you keep around with all your default configs. So the way this one works is you basically run a CLI command, and then you have some configuration in your package JSON, and based on that, it'll just spit out all that stuff for you. And I take community input, and I follow like a bunch of projects that create these best practices for what is the latest, greatest way to configure your ESLint or your stylint, and how to configure Babel and stuff like that. So it doesn't do framework things, because that's why it says it's like a boilerplate for new projects, bring your own framework. Because I think frameworks oftentimes have this built into their own little CLIs. So if you start up a new Vue project, or you start up a new React project with one of these like boilerplate things like Create React App or the Vue CLI, it does that. But there isn't something like that for somebody that's just like, oh, but I don't want to use any framework. I really, my needs are pretty simple, but I would like the linting and all that stuff there. But then the other side that the Project Calavera project also contains are exactly these things. So it's a basic template of a simple Express server. And so if you just want to create an Express server, but you don't want to go and set up the app.js and the default basic routes that you'll probably need and Helmet to configure security, you can just use the Calavera template and start your project from there. And so you kind of can hit the ground running and can get going quicker. But at the same time, it introduces you to existing code. So you might say like, oh, this is cool. What's all these things that it just gave me? And so I work hard on documenting, like, this is what it does. These are the things it brings in. This is what each of these individual dependencies do for you. But then people can go back and say, hey, you know what? Actually, this thing, I don't even think it should be part of the template, or I think the template is missing something, or hey, I think you got behind a little bit. I'm quite good at Express and we can improve it this way. Or for new people, it's just you can read through the code and say, oh, that is how when I enter localhost 3000, it's serving the index page. It's because I have this get route in this routes.js file. Ah, gotcha. Now I get it. So yeah, I think that template thing you talked about is definitely key.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that you brought up that's super key about why open source, and maybe this isn't open source since it really became a much larger thing in sort of the 2000s, but this idea of documentation, even like, even if you go through and do one of these online courses where it's telling you the thing and you do it, once you get the final project, generally it's not including like inline comments, right? Where you're actually like commenting on a method or commenting on a variable to say what this thing is for. I think as soon as you open up your code to the world, it's forced individuals that are either contributing or are creating to do a much better job at documenting, same with companies. And that's such a powerful thing for educational situations, learning situations, is to be able to go in and almost see line by line. And it doesn't fit in every situation, but for so many people to be able to reference back there on a regular basis is such a huge piece. And I certainly know like the framework that I had programmed in PHP many years ago and then heard it was terrible and moved away and then decided that I was going to build a project in it. But the framework that I chose specifically because the creator of it has incredible focus on documentation for it. So not only are the docs good, but like you can go into a controller. It's an MVC model, so it's like you can go into the controller, you can go into like new view, and they're all documented just incredibly well. So you don't need to guess about things; it's all provided for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Nuxt is the Vue version. I think Next is the React version. But either way, let's say it's Nuxt. Like it's so very well documented. Each because it generates a bunch of boilerplate for you, right? So it generates like folders and inside the folders or stuff. And as you open each folder, there's a README inside every folder that tells you what's the purpose of this folder and what's the purpose of the files in this folder. So there's no guesswork here. It's like, oh, I see. That's what it is. And it will, for example, say like, oh, there isn't, you'll say, but wait a minute, there isn't a store directory. And then you'll see there's a README where you would expect there to be store.readme. And you're like, open that. The reason there isn't a store is because Nuxt, this is the way the configuration works, and it generates the store for you. So you never have to worry about the store, and that is why it doesn't exist. I'm really impressed with their documentation. And I think the other side of documentation is opening it up to community for localization. I think I saw a documentary about Vue.js and the creator, Evan You. And one of the reasons Vue took off in China so much as opposed to React was literally because Evan is originally Chinese. He lives in the US. But for him, it was important to have the docs available in Chinese from the beginning. And so he opened it up to the community and he did some of the translation himself. And that is the main reason why Vue won over React when it comes to China, because for the people in China, it was very important to have it available in their language. And so that being there from the get-go, over and above the fact that it was really good documentation, the fact that it was available in their language made a big difference. And the more I am involved in communities like my CDM network and other larger communities I'm also involved with, I have gained an understanding and a respect for a lot of people that really love their native language. And for them, it's not like I can't speak English. It is really like they have a passion for their language. They have a passion for their culture. And it's important to them to be able to read the content in their language. And we often forget that. It's in English. Everybody can speak English, right? Yeah, it's not just about that. There's more to it. There's more subtleties about it. So I think it's important to encourage that when you run projects.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think yeah, it's the simple things that certainly as a native English speaker, I love going into these frameworks and these tools and looking at this code and finding it in my native language and uh, yeah, I think there's been a really big not maybe not resurgence or I think a big push around the world with it really focusing more on making accessibility not just about can people use this, but also can people use it in a way that they feel the most safe and comfortable.
Exactly, exactly. I think the term accessibility is getting a lot of attention, and I'm really, really happy about that because that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. But I think people have also understood that the umbrella that's covered by accessibility is much larger than what people has thought about in the past. Um, but I am super curious about Battlesnake, and the more you talk about it, the more curious I get. So I'm gonna please tell us more about Battlesnake.
Awesome. Yeah. So Battlesnake is a multiplayer programming game where your code is the controller, and you are building basically fundamentally you're building a web server to compete in the classic sort of Nokia phone game Snake. Did you ever play that where you sort of the snake goes up and you try and eat and you get longer and you try not to
Yep,
die?
yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
played
it's
that a
that.
lot.
Yeah, so it's that, but it's now a programming game where folks build out, I guess at a core level, they're building out an AI snake that's going to compete against other AI snakes to try and win and survive and win prizes or win points or win bragging rights or whatever you're looking to get out of the platform. And so it started out, I think in like the early aughts of the 2000s as a sort of a recruiting event. So it was run by a startup here in Victoria, and they would invite hundreds and what eventually became thousands of developers to come in and basically do a hackathon, but all focused on one specific problem, which was, can you build a snake that can beat the other snakes? And it's since transformed into a global platform. More than 10,000 developers around the world are playing this game right now, and really has shifted from a focus on recruiting to providing a really cool sandbox for professional developers to explore new technologies in a way that isn't having them just sort of build out a project that's kind of boring.
Yeah, that's super cool. I wonder, I've been seeing these, I haven't clicked on them yet. I don't know why. But anyway, I've been seeing videos pop up in my YouTube recommendations that's around the Nokia Snake thing. And now I'm starting to wonder, is this Battlesnake related? So I'm definitely going to click on one of those just after this chat and see if it's all about this. But I'm also going to look at Battlesnake and try it, give it a go. So can you kind of create like a little community and say we're going to build the mycelium network snake and see if it can beat stuff?
Yeah, so this is the cool thing. So this is a feature that's like very sort of early days. It's kind of, we've gone through many iterations, but yeah, so we're in the process of building up features where you would have a team, and it would basically be, you would sign up for the mycelium network team, and then your snake would be represented as the mycelium network there. But already, I think we just launched the feature really recently where you can run sort of a mycelium network tournament where people will build their own snakes and go and build them, and then you'll run sort of a small competition, and it auto generates the brackets and the ladders, and so basically you just press a button that says play and it'll have these big the games will show up, and it's super exciting to watch. Like it's one of these situations that is as close to a sort of a sporting event for competitive programming or for collaborative programming as you can possibly get. And it's good. Like if you got our CEO, our co-founder, has young kids and they love tuning in anytime we have a tournament, because it's just like bright colors and fun designs that are going around on the stage, but or around on the screen, but they love it. And they're cheering for their favorite snake and hoping that they win. And yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So it's very much like BattleBots, right? I love watching that,
Exactly.
where people build these bots and then they try and destroy the other bot. It's such a nerdy
Totally.
thing, but
And that's
it's
just it.
so fun.
It is. And now, like, that was always for, like, right, you had to be like an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer to build those bots. Now it's like you can be a software developer with a year of experience or one that has 10 years of experience, and you can go and build this really cool thing that teaches you a new language or a new technology stack, and really do it in a way that you're not just building a project that's going to sit in a repository somewhere and that nobody's going to care about. Like, you're invested in this code that you've created in a way that it's sort of personified. You can add custom skins to it, so you can have heads and tails that are like from a big list of customizations, and you can get points to get more of them. And yeah, it's just so exciting. And one of the big reasons that has been super successful is open source. Like almost all of the platform, all of the key components of it are open source. We have folks contributing to it all the time, but also community has been a massive, massive part of its success, of just like enabling the community to get in there and get their hands dirty with code.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was about to ask about the open source thing because I remember you mentioned that, and I was like, oh wow. So I guess there's quite a lot of opportunity for folks to also contribute like directly to the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's even gotten to the point where so we've had open source, it's sort of tying this back to the documentation piece. We've had a documentation like repository forever that was really only managed by our team, and we really always wanted community members to join. But then we had a bunch of community members that were like, I'd really like to see this in there, but I don't want to contribute to the official documentation. So they created like a separate documentation that we provided support for, and now that's become our official documentation setup. And so it's a community-led project that we were like, yes, this is the thing that we really want to adopt. And so that's like at this core level now. This code that is such a core piece of what we do is something that our community said we can do it better.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that is where diversity comes in, right? Oftentimes, if you open it up to the world and say, poke at our stuff and tell us if you can think of better ways of doing it, more often than not, it does happen. And I love the fact that the company was willing to embrace this, because so often people are very precious about the things they make, if you know what I mean. And so they're like, no. It could not possibly be better than what we did. So kudos to the company for adopting this. I think it's amazing. I've like had a little poke at your website and LinkedIn and stuff like that, and I'm curious about this one thing. So you've written scholarly documents on quantum computing. Do you want to tell us about some of those? Like, you have linked to like these citations. Like, I had a friend that worked at a quantum computing company for a little bit. I've listened to the Wired thing where they like explain it to me like I'm 5. I've listened to that. It's fascinating. I still don't think I quite understand it, but I would love to hear your take on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I built out, or when I was working with the team that built out the High Tech U program at the University of Victoria, one of the co-founders and a huge mentor to me, Ulrika Steiger, so she was the chair of the computer science department at the University of Victoria at the time, and her and her husband, actually, who's also a professor at the university in software engineering, have been sort of the quintessential leaders in the space of quantum computing education at the University of Victoria, and actually arguably in British Columbia and Canada and North America. And one of the key pieces when they were building out that sort of what quantum computing education looks like, which was at a focus on the post-secondary level, was we want to make this accessible for everybody, because it's too late if they're in their postdocs to be learning about quantum computing. This is like a hugely up and coming field. So the initial sort of iteration was we create a play on words. So we did, instead of High Tech U, we called it High Tech Q, and
Clever.
and really focus just on how can we take the core components of quantum computing and make it accessible to a high school student. And so the first year that we ran the sort of workshop, we had some partners from IBM, and we were able to get access to IBM's quantum computing sort of their actual quantum computer, as well as their simulation software, and gave learners like this run through. And what's really cool is we sort of the focus there was actually to build out a curriculum that again was open source for people to use, where we were testing the waters to see what this looked like at the high school level. And then we published a few papers to then say, here's where you can go and do it yourself.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's great. I'll definitely link those up. And I'm going to read them myself. That's for sure. Another thing that I found that you wrote on this Battlesnake blog actually is deploying web servers for free in 2022. I think this is a key piece that's often missing. A lot of people are like, okay, cool, I understand HTML and CSS. I think I'm starting to get to grips with JavaScript. But how the heck do I get this on a website? Like it's cool, like GitHub, but I want my own URL and like things. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is one of these interesting situations that I run into as sort of the non-developer working for developers and doing things that newbies do. There's a really cool initiative that we run through Battlesnake called our Developer Fellowship, which is a program focused on providing support to women and non-binary developers from across Canada who just don't have access to either people or mentorship or resources. And through that,
That's
one
amazing.
of the big pieces, yeah, so like super cool initiative. We do it with a bank here in Canada called RBC, who are just this spectacular partner for Battlesnake. And one of the pieces of that was educational opportunities. And so I wanted to be able to go in with these developers that were joining and say, here's a bunch of ways that you can deploy a Battlesnake to learn a new technology. And so I spent a morning and I just like went on all these platforms that I basically Googled, like, how can I do this really fast and for cheap? And then like did like a timing. And then our CEO Brad was like, hey man, you need to do this as like a legitimate blog post that you can share out more widely. And so that queued up I think like a 2-month journey of me going and finding even more platforms and like trying to build this out. It doesn't necessarily look that way in the final blog post, but we've got more. Like I deployed on about, I think 12 different services. And we were like, we're going to start with the 5 that we have here and then go from there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No. I fully understand. Like I heard a famous quote once there where a person said, it took me 4 hours to make a 10-minute video. So I totally understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the focus with this, for anybody that wants to read it, it's really cool. If you go to blog.battlesnake.com, it's kind of linked on there. But basically my focus with this was for folks that are at my level or sort of like early stage developers that are not able to log into AWS and figure things out, or like they look at that and then they run away screaming, was to look and find accessible. And I know we're using that word a lot, but like, I mean, accessible for the lay person or the new person to go in and within like 5 minutes, ideally, get a functional web server out there from an open source GitHub template. And it's funny. Despite the fact that AWS and Azure and GCP kind of have the market share for like large companies that are doing it, there's a lot of these smaller companies that are coming out, especially now that Heroku has decided to remove their free plan in sort of September, October. There's more of these companies that are sort of releasing better free plans for people to get there. And so I got to do like massive shout out. There's a platform that is actually based here in Canada as well, actually here on the West Coast, that is I think fundamentally is a game changer in the open source deployment space called Railway. And it's the most beautiful and smoothest platform that I've ever used. They also include in their, when you're starting a new project with them, you can choose from a bunch of open source projects. And when you click deploy, it goes through and reads everything, but it'll deploy the database, it'll deploy your server, it'll give you a public domain. And it's all free for like 500 hours a month. So just like super, super cool.
Wow. That is really impressive. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. It's incredible the tooling that's becoming available. I honestly like the ability to just open your browser and like do everything. Like you don't have to even leave your browser. It's super amazing. I don't know if you know about the browser company. They make this browser called Arc. It's pretty new. It's pretty new. And it's based on Chromium, but the experience is completely different. Like they're re-envisioning what a browser can be. And I actually had a talk from the CEO the other day about some of the dreams they have for Arc. And he sees this as essentially this future where what he calls internet machines are going to become the thing. And it's very Chromebooky in nature. It's this idea that Arc can be not just your browser, but it's your computer. Because if so many things that you think is an application is actually just a web app that's running in Electron or something like that, where it's in the end of the day, it's actually just a browser. Um, and so the idea is that, Arc will open up those possibilities and make it like this thing that you just open up and you're like, okay, cool, open up Arc, and the rest of the day you're just an Arc. And like GitHub has done so much to do this, like getting around GitHub with their command palette. You just hit Command K on a Mac and it pops open and you're just like, okay, I want to go to this repo, boop, oops, now I want to go to that one, Command K. You don't even have to click. You can just use the keyboard to get around. You can move files, you can rename files. And then if you really want to do some intricate work, you just open a code space. Now you've got the entire VS Code running in your browser, but all it's synced with your local VS Code, so it brings in all your extensions and everything's there. And then you have services like Railway you talked about, where you can just say, okay, cool, Railway, take all the stuff I just did and deploy it all, database and all. It's amazing.
It is. And there's another one similar to the code spaces. I don't know if you've heard of Gitpod. Have you heard of them?
I've heard about it. Yeah, somebody mentioned it to me. I want to look at that.
Yeah, so it's the same idea as code spaces, but the entire platform, that's all they do is basically just do code spaces. But it's I've used both when I was setting up on during that sort of blog post process. It literally like runs up a full setup for you, including your in-web browser in like, I don't know, it was like 20 seconds. It was ridiculously fast. And I was like, I don't know how you're doing this, especially when this is free for a lot of the time, but also it's just so incredible. And it's funny because I purchased a secondary device. It was a Chromebook, and I've tried to set up set up things on my local device and like use the back end sort of like Linux environment that it gives you. And yeah, I ended up like, you run into so many issues that you're like, can I do this in the browser? And you can, and it's so much easier. You don't need to worry about where were your most recent commits if you didn't actually push it up to where you should have pushed it up at the time. It's just all there for you. And I think that's actually that's a big, for new web developers, folks that are getting into the space. I think that's a game changer, this whole browser-based setup. I have a colleague that has been a software developer for years, and they said to me recently, one of the biggest things that I do with folks that are getting involved in sort of a technology role, or they want to get in there, is I will sit down with them for 2 to 3 hours, and I will just like spend all that time to get them set up with the perfect development environment. Because if they have a terrible experience with getting their dev environment set up, they're going to walk away. And so making that process and getting rid of the barriers that exist there, I think is a huge game changer. Yeah.
I'm finding with the people that I have in the community, I'm finding that people on Windows machines are especially struggling with this. I mean, kudos to Microsoft for adding like Windows subsystem for Linux and making that be more and more seamless. But even with that, it's still really hard. Like if you're not on a Mac or if you're not on Linux, Linux is still tricky, but much, much easier than Windows. That's oftentimes what you end up doing most of your day, is fighting with your tools. And that's the last thing you want to do, even as a professional being in the industry for 10 years, 15 years. The last thing you want to do is wake up and fight with your tools. You want to solve problems. You want to be, productive. You don't want to like, I just can't do this thing because VS Code's being weird, or because for some reason like MongoDB has just disappeared. Like suddenly I don't have MongoDB anymore. So I think these in-browser things that also gives you this ability to create like these dev containers, like you can do in code spaces, where basically you open it up and it's like, I'm just going to get everything ready for you because the creator of this code space has already told me what you will need. So I'm going to download all these extensions. I'm going to do all these configurations, and you just open a file and start writing code. I think it's definitely, like you say, it's a complete game changer.
It's funny. So for anybody that's out there that is on Windows, so I'm a Windows developer. I do it there. I struggled for years with this same thing. I found this brilliant piece of software, open source software again, called Laragon. And so this is kind of like a watered down, or maybe not watered down, based on my understanding of like a local Docker instance, but it's not that. It's just an app. It runs the web server. It's like LAMP or like WAMP, like those old systems that you had
Yeah.
set up.
Hmm.
But it's much more modern. You can, with the click of a button, you can install anything that you want to, even to the point of like publishing or getting your app up on ngrok, whereas normally you'd have to go through a bunch of steps in the command line. It's literally just like you right click on the app and then click deploy to the internet, and then it'll just like spin up an ngrok URL for you that you're able to use. Just like it was a game changer for me when I discovered it.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I'm definitely going to share that like with everybody. It almost feels like it's almost like, I don't know if you know Setup. Setup is this thing you get on Macs, where you pay like $10 a month, and then it's got all like these applications that solves all these little problems for you. It's often like indie developers, and they've created like this little app that does this one thing really, really well. But there's also like big apps on there that you wouldn't even expect to be on there, seeing that you only have $10 a month. But it almost feels like a setup, but for developers. And I think that would actually be super awesome if somebody can create something like that that's cross-platform, where you literally say, well, I need a server that can run PHP, I need a MySQL database, and I need a VS Code thing, and I need that. And it just goes, cool, here I go, brrr, boop, and there's everything for you. That would be amazing. So there's project ideas.
I
Somebody
would.
wants to take it.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I totally feel the pain of all those Windows developers out there. And yeah, what you're talking about, right? Having these, again, going back to the browser piece, say what you want about folks that are not able to set up a local development environment, and that may cause challenges for them later on in their career. But for especially for early stage folks that are really just needing to get into the code and not fight and not know how to troubleshoot these things, I think there's going to be a big shift in certainly for junior devs especially.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Um, so I want to cycle back into something different that's very, very different to what we've been talking about, but I think it's something to touch on. Seeing that you are kind of, and it's interesting because you're kind of like both sides of the coin. You've been involved with education, but you're also like a web developer still learning the craft and going through interviews and all that kind of good stuff. What are your thoughts around interviews, especially related to the tech industry? I think interviews are generally a challenging thing, no matter what the industry, but I want us to kind of focus in on the tech industry. Do you have any thoughts around this topic? I know it's a bit of a hot topic, but anything you want to say?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I come to this from an interesting angle, just because even the position that I have with Battlesnake, it wasn't necessarily an interview per se in the traditional way. So the interview that I actually had that kind of got me in there, and I think there's probably some piece of that that people can take away, was the work that I did with High Tech U. So the founder of Battlesnake, which is the company that I work for now, when we were first building out the program, we went and met with, I think, 30 different tech companies and said, hey, we've got this idea. What do you think about this? And it was generally just a fact-finding mission. And we went and met with this one company and they said, we love this idea. It's fantastic. How much money do you need to make it successful? And we threw out a number that was way too small. And he said, add another zero. And we'll make that happen. And so through that process, it was a lot of sort of them being really involved and seeing how I worked and the things that I was able to accomplish, and to get an idea of who I was as sort of a worker and just a person. And then when the opportunity came that this position became open, it was sort of more of a conversation. So I think while this doesn't tie necessarily directly into the interview, one of the things that I will say is you never know where a job is going to come from, and you never know what is actually an interview that you don't realize.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
anytime you're interacting with somebody in the technology industry, I would say from step one, from that cold email that you're sending them to the coffee that you're having with them, all of that is an interview process. And as somebody who has hired a lot of people that are in the technology space, I will also say interviewing sucks for the interviewer. Interviewing is time consuming. Interviewing is stressful. Interviewing is oftentimes just not an area of focus for people. So employers really want you to be successful. They're not going into it like, despite the old view of sort of three people sitting on a panel across from you and them sort of challenging you to show that you're worth there, they want you to be successful. By the time you get into the interview, they already like you. It's your job just to sort of show them why and to demonstrate that. Yeah. Does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah. And I spoke to somebody during the week for a different recording, a different episode, and they said an interesting thing, which I kind of knew, but I forgot about the fact that is actually the most important thing. The most important thing almost when you're in an interview is, yeah, sure, your tech skills is important, and some companies focus too heavily on that, especially when they have like all these crazy algorithms and stuff like that, and what the dreaded whiteboard challenges. But companies that take a different approach to this and a more healthier approach, generally what they want to understand is, what value do you bring to the company? And that is what you have to focus on. If they hire you, how will it make their company better? I think that is what they really want, right? Like, sure, they know they need another developer because there's a lot of work to do, but what is the value you bring? Is there like something in your background that's really unique? Do you have a unique perspective on the thing? And I think researching the company, and therefore not just doing the thing where you just send out resumes to 200 companies and hoping somebody comes back to you. I think you have to instead like really go and do some research about companies that you would be interested in working for, and find out what they're talking about, what they're blogging about. And if you have a unique idea, this is the time to bring it up. It's in that interview. Like, so I read this thing that you wrote and I really like the idea, but I was thinking, and I think blah, blah, blah. I think that is the conversations that's going to get you in the door, more than just your technical skills by itself.
Absolutely. I would say like it's always that last question that is asked by every interviewer everywhere in the world, which is, do you have any questions for us? Which is actually like the one that's gonna like land you in that job, or could just be a thing that you miss out on. It's such a huge opportunity, especially if you're going in and your questions are only around what's the salary like, or like what's the like some very low level or just surface level piece, but actually digging in and being like, so yeah, I saw this post, and like, how did you decide that was the way that you were going to pursue, like opening the conversation, right? It shows that you're interested in what they're doing. I couldn't agree more. I think there's huge power in a question that seems like it's just a filler.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's super important. And it's I think people have the wrong perception of that question. That question isn't just asked. I think that question is asked deliberately to see if you have the confidence to ask questions. Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to waste their time. No, people actually want you. That's critical. I know I've interviewed people for positions, and I've almost always had a much better feeling about candidates that had insightful questions, and not about like how much money or working hours, but more stuff about like the culture of the company. How do you work together as a team? What are the goals for the company in the next 6 months? And then when you like tell them the things you can about all these things, to have follow-ups, to actually actively listen, and then have follow-up questions in the moment, like like what we're talking now. Like a lot of this is not rehearsed. I say a thing, you tee off from that, I tee off from that. I think that is what really gets you in, because that creates a human connection with the interviewer. So it becomes less of a interviewee, and it becomes a conversation between two people that just want to make the company succeed. I think that is something that people forget.
Absolutely, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people that are interviewing, they're interviewing to see if you're a good fit with the team. And while that causes, I think, some challenges, because in a lot of cases that means you end up hiring a lot of people that look the same, or think the same way. If going into it recognizing that really people are wanting to know who you are as a person and not necessarily the things that you've done in the past, it's more about who you are and traits, right? I think, I mean, we talked about problem solving, but things like coachability and teachability and passion for like curiosity. If somebody like if somebody sparks within their conversation that they love learning, that is more powerful to me than if they can solve the most complex problem, because there will always be a more complex problem. And if you're only worried about sort of like being able to demonstrate you can solve it, that's only going to get you so far.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, I agree. So I think we're an hour in. Wow, I can't believe it. So I think I just have maybe one or two more things, and then if you have anything also, talking about when you're not making awesome battle snakes or writing blog posts, what are the things that interest you in this world outside of, maybe even outside of tech? I know for a lot of people, when you ask that question, they're like, I still do tech stuff in my free time, and that's totally fine. What do you like to do when you're not on the job?
Yeah, so I'm kind of there. I'm trying to get away from it. So I guess I've come to the tech industry through a lot of like windy, wavy processes and experiences. So what's interesting is I really only within the past sort of, I would say, 5 years have I really been in the technology space. So much of my time up until then was the thing I would do in my spare time was tech stuff. And now I'm kind of getting paid for doing tech related things. And so I still do tech stuff in my spare time. But thankfully, my lovely wife is definitely not that person. She is definitely the outdoor person who enjoys like experiencing the world. Where we live in British Columbia and on Vancouver Island specifically is absolutely gorgeous. So one of the things that's a big thing for us is hiking. So we hike, and I say this and may regret it, but we hike religiously, and it's just because it happens on Sundays. We do it every Sunday. We'll drive, we'll hike for a couple of hours. And it's such a getting back to like grounding yourself on a weekly basis, especially when you're sitting and staring at a computer screen for many, many hours a day, is such a powerful thing. So
That's
that,
very true.
and then yeah, right. And like, what about you? What about you? What do you do in the non-tech related time, Shalk?
Pretty much a lot of the same, to be honest. We don't have a ton of hiking things. We used to do it, and then we kind of like fell off with COVID and stuff like that. We kind of like lost that, but we're trying to get back. The problem is we have pets that we'd like to take on a hike, and in South Africa, it's kind of hard to find places that's pet friendly. Like if you have a dog that you want to take with, stuff like that. So we're currently like actually researching and trying to find places that is dog friendly, because we do enjoy that as a family. So that's something that we'd like to do again. But we have a golf course close to us, and they kind of have a walking path there, and that's dog friendly. So that's something that we do like in the week. Like maybe you just feel like I need an hour's break, and just the kids, we take the dogs and we just go for a walk. And it's amazing what it does to your mental health, just taking that break.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then I guess the other thing, the tech fun thing that I do. So when I was going through teachers college and I did my master's in education as well, and it was specifically focused on sort of like alternative educational assessment, of sort of like reimagining what the report card is and how it can help learners. And so when I initially developed it, it was sort of it was like a form, it was like a rubric. And then I built, as part of my thesis, I ended up building sort of a Google Apps app, like basically using the Google Sheets, and just sort of building a pseudo database in the background. And then when I was done, I went and pitched it to the school that I'd been working with, and they said, could it have this function? Could you turn it into a web app? And that was a dangerous thing to say, because while I said no initially, then I was like, could I? I don't know how to do this, but could I? And now, like a year later, I'm still actively working on it, like in every spare moment that I have.
I have that exact same problem. I constantly, maybe I start poking at one thing and then I'm like, wonder if I can do that. I can. Oh, cool. And then, oh, but if I can do that, I wonder if I can do that. And before you know it, it's like
Absolutely.
3 hours later. And this like thing that maybe was at one purpose can now do all these different things. And I think that's just the natural curiosity that is part of
Yeah.
the tech industry.
I so agree. I feel like that. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's a professional software developer, and they were saying the same thing of like, you can do anything. Like, that's the very cool thing about tech is almost anything you can imagine, you can do. The question is, should you? Should you do it? But also like being able to like time box yourself, right? Put yourself in this time period.
Yeah.
But yeah, like this app started out very simple. And then as you learn more and you discover the features and you actually start to understand how thing works, you're like, okay, I can do this. But you're just like you said, it's like, you're like, I'm going to do this in a half an hour. 4 hours later, as you're like sweating because your problem solving is like not getting you to the place you need to go. Again, I'm very glad I have a non sort of tech wife. Like my partner is just like can use computers very well, but is not the developer. And she's like, you need to walk away from this. You need to go, and we need to go for that hike.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's super important. Yeah, to have that balance. It's great if you have somebody that can like literally drag you away from the laptop and say, that's enough now. It's brilliant. So in closing, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Any like parting words of wisdom, anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I think my only words of wisdom that I can provide, and this comes from experience and from talking to a lot of people, be curious. Be focused on learning and growing. A growth mindset will bring you farther in not only the technology industry, but any industry. It's going to make you a massively valuable asset that keeps growing, and is going to help you to discover things that you didn't even know about yourself. And in terms of that growth mindset, don't just let it be about things that you can do. Let it be about internal growth as well and discovering who you are and things that you enjoy. Technology is spectacular and it can help you do a lot of things for others, but really take time to focus on yourself and discover, learn more about yourself and take time there as well. So grow outwards and also grow inwards.
That is super valuable advice. Thanks for sharing that. Well, thank you, Andrew. This was really great. I mean, we've been at it for over an hour, and it surely doesn't feel like it. Thanks so much for taking time on your Friday to speak with me and share all this wonderful information with our community. I really, really appreciate it.
Amazing. And thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Polywork for having a place that makes these opportunities available. I think the work that you're doing at Mycelium Network and the community you're building, this is exactly what the world needs right now, making technology accessible for everybody. And so thank you so much for having me. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it.
You're so welcome, and thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Have a good day, man. Cheers.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mycelium Network podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Have something to add? Continue the conversation on GitHub and join the community on Slack. Until the next one, keep making the web awesome.